Welcome, everyone, to the True Data Ops podcast. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. Each week, we're going to bring you a podcast covering all things data ops with the people that are making data ops what it is today. My guest today is well-known author and podcaster and data engineer, Joe Reis, the co-founder and CEO of Ternary Data. Welcome to the show, Joe. Good to see you again.
Hey, how's it going? Likewise. Good to see you.
So for the folks who haven't listened to your podcast yet, and don't know all that much about you, would you mind giving folks a little bit of your background and what you've been doing in data management?
Yeah. So I've worked in data in some capacity or other for over 20 years now. Mainly, I guess, in whatever you would call data science. And I jokingly call myself a recovering data scientist because over the many years, I've realized that there's, especially on the productionized machine learning, for example, there's a lot to it. And so I switched gears into data engineering a while ago, and I guess the rest, they say, is history. So I do also host a podcast called the Monday Morning Data Chat. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, go check it out. You can find it on various podcast platforms. And I also co-authored Fundamentals of Data Engineering along with Matt Housley. So that's my claim to fame right now. So, and folks can, of course, find you on LinkedIn. Check out everything there, all your articles, your books, and that's where you schedule your Monday morning podcast, right? Yep. Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, that's where you can catch us live. So yeah, check it out. We got a show next Monday. It's every Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. So
very good.
Yeah, Kent's been on there before.
It's a fun podcast. Yeah. So we're here to talk about data ops, as you know. So dive right in, and want to get your perspective. You're gone, like you said, from data science into data engineering. What's your perspective on data ops, and how does it really fit into our modern data space?
I think it's becoming. I'm glad it's becoming more and more recognized. And I define it broadly as like three things, really. It's automation, observability and monitoring, and then incident response, right? And of course, there's the Data Ops Manifesto, which outlines the goals of data ops and whatnot. But I figure it's a necessary precursor for the data industry to mature. Up until now, I'm sure you can attest to this, Kent. Prior to data ops, things were pretty fast and loose, I would say. And I think as data management professionals, the industry did its best to do what it could with the tools it had. But data ops certainly codifies and I think makes more official, best practices. I mean, in a lot of cases, it's just extending what DevOps, for example, provided for software engineering, but with its own, flavor on data, so to speak, which is different than application engineering and so forth. So.
Yeah, I mean, we had in the software engineering space, DevOps, right? And a lot of books on that. The Phoenix Project comes to mind, which I would say it's probably right there on your desk, right? Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, pulled a few relevant titles out. I wish there was a version of this for data. I've been toying around the idea of writing something like that if it doesn't exist.
The couple of guys, myself, Wayne Eckerson, Mike Ferguson, and Justin Mullen and Guy Adams, we did the Data Ops for Dummies. So we did do that. Nice. That came out probably about this time last year, I think.
Oh, nice. I'll check that out.
Yeah, so that's that's the only one that I know of that's out there, and it's you can get it off DataOps.live off their website. Nice. But yeah, so we try to do that. I mean, we got in. We have a site up. I don't know if you've seen it, the TrueDataOps.org site. So we took a step off of the Agile Manifesto and came up with 7 pillars of true data ops and what we think is necessary to be successful, right? Because the Agile Manifesto, like you said, is the Data Ops Manifesto, similar to the Agile Manifesto, is a great starting point. And the guys that wrote that really kind of kickstarted the data ops movement, as it will. We decided, we want to go a little deeper on that. I spent a lot of years talking about the principles of Agile as opposed to the Agile Manifesto, because it was like one level down, a little more get to having some practical conversations about what does it mean to be agile. So with DataOps, we wanted to do the same thing and say, what do we mean when we say DataOps? What do we really get into? And like you said, automation is one of the keys. And along those lines, you've done a lot of work with a lot of different tools in the data engineering space. How are you seeing the evolution of automation in particular with, I'll say, data engineering, data pipelines, and things like that?
I mean, in a lot of ways, we're coming from I would say, almost it's kind of greenfield in a lot of ways, right? I would say, the rise of, DataOps specific tools. So back in the day, what you'd use, like maybe Datadog or something like that. And pumping into your data into like an influx database or something like that. Right. Or some sort of tool where you could get some pretty basic monitoring. But back in the day, at least from what I experienced, the data tooling was very tightly coupled. Data ops is very tightly coupled to application ops, DevOps, and there really wasn't a distinction. And so it wasn't very data centric.
Yeah.
Right. Fast forward to nowadays, and it's you got any number of observability tools, for example. Which I think is great. And I think it's only the first step, really. I mean, a lot of the stuff people are still trying to figure out as they go along, because the notion of observing data, I think, is still fairly new in some ways as well, right? And so there's just some quirks to it. As I write in the book, data's it's a silent killer, right? So with DevOps, if your application fails, for example, because it doesn't work or it doesn't pass a slew of tests. Data is much more sneaky in that way, where the data might be wrong for a while. Actually, in some cases, I've seen data wrong for years and nobody caught it. So meanwhile, you're making, I guess, what would be called directionally correct decisions at that point, but it's maybe not the correct decision. But you still manage to get by. But I suppose getting by is becoming less and less of an option these days, especially as we're getting more into real-time applications that rely on data and so forth.
Yeah, no, I had that experience over a decade ago, where we had a enterprise data warehouse that was loading. The load scripts were running, all that was great, but nobody had ever actually bothered to check the data, and they got to a point where somebody was building a report, and they suddenly discovered that one of the columns they wanted was empty. And so we started tracing it back from the report tables to the warehouse tables to the stage tables. And we discovered this one column was empty all the way back to the stage tables, like completely null, not a single value in it. Ooh. And so nobody had ever. This is the classic, it compiled. Do you remember those days? We say, yeah, that program compiled.
Yeah.
Well, somebody did that with the ETL process and said, well, it ran and there's data in the table. All they did is look to see, was their data loaded, but they never looked to see if the right data was loaded or if all the data was loaded. And as it turned out, here was a column completely empty. Had gotten completely missed by the ETL developers because there was a typo in the column name in the specs. And so the column name in the specs didn't match the column name in the table, so they didn't map it. And they didn't bring it up to anybody that they hadn't mapped it. And there was no testing at the time going on. And that's kind of where I've seen one of the biggest gaps. And it's one of the 7 pillars on True Data Ops is automated regression testing and monitoring for that reason. What are you seeing in that area with the folks that you're working with? Are people in the data world starting to test the data? Whether it's data quality or just completeness or something, to make sure it's what they expect it to be.
We're starting to see more of that for sure. And apologies, can everyone hear me okay? I keep getting a note that my audio is not quite as good as yours, Ken, but on a loud mic. So if people could, anyway, let me know. That'd be great. But back to your question, it's starting to become more top of mind for sure. So, there's I guess the notion of expectations now, right? Brought about by a open source vendor of much the same name, and so that's a buzzword that's starting to be thrown around a lot more, and I think it's great. In fact, it's interesting at my Python meetup that I held in Salt Lake City. I think that was the first unveiling of Great Expectations like several years ago, and when I saw it, I immediately got it. It was really simple. My friend wrote this open source package, friend Taylor. He's like, yeah, and it does a data quality test. I'm like, makes sense. You should do that. I'm glad that came about. So, and it was to solve their own problem in healthcare data, right? So, and I think you fast forward to today, and I think it's definitely becoming more top of mind. Like Databricks has their own sort of, expectations package, and I'm not sure if Snowflake has a similar one, but it definitely seems like data testing is becoming more of a first-class citizen on a lot of these toolings, precisely because it addresses a lot of the problems like you highlighted. Like that sounds like an absolute horror story.
Oh, right? Yeah. And I got to be the one doing the research to figure it out, and finally got back to, I finally pulled up the specs and I discovered the spelling error myself, and then talked to the manager, the ETL developer who was dealing with offshore developers. And there was no explanation other than somebody had literally transposed 2 letters when they were typing the spec. And yes, it's like the column was there, and it was actually, there was a mapping in the spec to take the source data into the stage table, but the target column name, they had transposed 2 letters in the column name. And since the ETL developers couldn't find that exact column name, they didn't do the mapping. And nobody ever validated that. And it was literally like 6 months in. So we're talking millions of rows of data in this stage table, been pushed all the way through to production and reports. And somebody was building a new report where, okay, this attribute now was a requirement, where before it wasn't, right? It wasn't, doing agile report development. It's like, now it's a requirement. And there was no data there. So it had literally been going on for 6 months, and nobody had ever noticed because it wasn't a business requirement to use that data. And so nobody tested for it.
Very interesting. Okay, so I think this highlights a point then that we should probably discuss, which is involving stakeholders in data quality from the beginning, right? I think that would solve a lot of these problems. It's amazing. This is something if you were to ask me what I'm urging companies to do too, data teams, is talking to the people who create the data upstream, the people who are responsible for it. I mean, if you want to talk about ops, it's no different really than what you do in software. I mean, you want to get as close to the root cause of the problems as possible. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, you can test for data quality. You can observe pipelines and all the stuff, and that's great. And you should do that. But at the same time, there's nothing like getting to know how data is introduced into the systems that you're depending upon, right? And so, obviously, in some companies, this might be not really scalable, but if that's a thing, then I would say that would go a long ways to solving a lot of problems. And it's like very low fidelity too. You don't have to have expensive tooling to get involved and talk to people. Like what you just described, like that was an accident, right? And how much time did that take? That's crazy. 2 characters, that's it. So how many seconds did that take? Not even a second to introduce that error.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was no time at all to introduce the error. And it was bizarre. It was totally bizarre, but it took days. It took days to figure out where the problem was, and then I had to manually write SQL against the database myself to find it. And then once I discovered what it was, then everybody's going, well, why? How did that happen? And then we eventually got back into looking at the ETL specs, and it all had gone through change control. A 6-week change control process. So before everything got promoted to production, all of these things were required. Supposedly, basically. Highly compliant, all documented, all of that. But yeah, like I said, there had never been any testing in there. So now on the flip side,
how many did you say? 6 weeks or months?
6 months it had been running without anybody noticing the data wasn't there.
But for the change that you
the change control process. Oh, geez, yeah, this was a big enterprise here in the United States, and their change control process, it took 6 weeks to run through all the paperwork and getting it in front of an approval board for something to be approved, to be moved from development to QA, and then QA to production. And that was like if we hit the days right? If you got it in before the deadline, it would take 6 weeks to move something into production. Now, when we found this,
so I mean, it speaks to where DataOps.
Oh yeah. Now, like I said, this was 15 years ago, and I was struggling with that organization, trying to get them to be agile. They would not put together agile teams, put us with the business on any regular basis. A couple of months later, though, we got a mission critical system that was going to be replaced as part of the consolidation. And then we were able to get an agile team put together. And in that one, we actually sat with the business people. This was supply chain, with a couple of supply chain, director level people sat with us in a room while we were developing the data marts and everything they needed. And so the first thing we would do once we got, it was an extract from SAP, we'd get it into the database, and then we would immediately dump the data into an Excel spreadsheet and give it to them. And they were going through line by line through the Excel spreadsheets, comparing it to what was in SAP to make sure it was right. And one of the weird things that happened with that is we discovered of the, X 100,000 lines of data we should have been getting, we were getting less than 10% of the data. And these guys discovered it, a couple of weeks in. Very quickly, we were starting to ramp things up and discovered that, yes, we were getting all the data and the data was right, but we weren't getting all the rows of data. And that turned out to be a buffer problem on the SAP BW export process that was writing things to flat files, and it was backing up because we ran so long. It was hitting some sort of a queue, and then it was cutting it off. And that then took weeks for us to get the team that was responsible for writing the extracts to actually fix it, because they didn't believe us. It took a couple of weeks for us to convince them that the data was wrong, that we weren't getting all the data we were supposed to do. But the only way we discovered it in that case was because we were working hand in hand with the business, and the business was reviewing the data. We didn't wait till we got it to reporting tables. As soon as it hit a stage table, we had them reviewing it in a raw form in an Excel spreadsheet, because that's what they understood, right? Like you said, it doesn't have to be highly sophisticated. They were just able to go in, ODBC connection to the database, pull the data out, and go, wait a minute, there should have been, this many rows changed yesterday. Why don't we have all that data, on the new, because we were doing deltas, and the delta wasn't right. But yeah, that was something that was kind of, it was secondary, right? And I've seen this in a lot of places, and I assume you have too, where the idea of the data quality and data completeness testing has been a secondary thought. It's like, we'll do that if we have to, right? If we've got time, right?
If we got time.
If we got time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too. I mean, but you see it nowadays too, even in, I see it in big companies, I see it in startups, and it's really, it's it's a spectrum that I call kind of like fast versus formal, or, and it's either you can do things the formal way and get it done, the right way, or you could just move really quickly. And the ironic part is if you can move slow to move fast at some point, then that probably pays off quicker, just as it does in, when you're training for a race or something. But it's what's really interesting is I think people just put it off to the side and say, look, we just need to get this done today, not knowing what this means exactly. So that's one thing I haven't really seen change too much. And so I think it comes, for DataOps to really work, it really comes back to having a, I guess for lack of a better way of putting it, a data-centric culture. But that's, an appreciation of the value the data can bring and the work it takes to get there. But that's also the hard part, because it flies in the face of, almost human nature in some ways, right? Where you got constraints, time and money being two of them. And therefore, what do you want to do? So, well, and here we are. That's why a lot of these practices and tooling have come about, the reaction to it.
So that brings me to one of my other questions is, you've got people, processes, and technology. So which do you find is the biggest barrier to success in the modern data world?
People still. Without question.
No question.
So, yeah.
And what, do you have any advice for organizations that are kind of facing that. They're trying to improve the maturity of their data management practice and are running into these sorts of issues that they have a people problem there in their organization and their organizational culture. How do we get there? How do we get there, man?
It's a great question and not an easy answer. So I think if it was easily answerable, we would solve it by now. But it definitely comes back to, hold on, one more book here. I've been really nerding out on team topologies and Conway's law. If you're familiar with that, basically you'll design systems of communication, in the way your organization is set up, but it's definitely true, right? And so I see this as like one of the bigger impediments to doing anything, whether it's a software or whether it's data. It's just like, how do you get past the people problem and then more the organizational problem, right? So in this book, and I do agree with this, I'd like your opinion, but all too often when you see systems set up according to how the org chart is set up, that's a big red flag, right? 'Cause it's not according to how maybe the business actually operates, but it's very hierarchical in terms of roles, and that's but inevitably this is what you come across, right? So it's roles versus I guess functionality. This is one of the areas where I see a lot of tension.
Yeah.
So, but again, if it was that easy, it would be.
And I certainly have seen that in large organizations where there was a lot of, we worry about silos of data all the time, right? But there was actually the business, the functions were siloed. So you had the ETL team, you had the data architect team, you had the data modeling team, and then the business people are somewhere else, right? And there's a lot of handoffs going on, where basically we used to say, we did the data model, we threw it over the wall to the developers, right? Mm-hmm. And if the developers didn't understand it, then they just, did their best. And by the time it gets finished, okay, well, we have a column that doesn't have any data in it, right? Because nobody was thinking holistically about it. And I think that's where, I think Agile and a lot of the Agile thought and way of building, at least, Scrum teams in particular, having cross-functional teams was valuable. And of course, today, this comes out in terms of data mesh, right? And having domain teams. Have you had much experience? Have you worked with anybody that's trying to do this? They take a data mesh approach or build domain-based teams that are maybe a little more cross-functional in that regard, so they're working together better.
I see people starting to try it, yeah, and I think it's largely an extension of if you're successful with maybe domain-driven design in your applications, then you might have a fighting chance of doing something like data mesh, but if you try to attack it from, we're going to do data mesh without having the culture, of a team that's really used to working in domains, I don't think that's a good idea. And Zhamak, she'll tell you the same thing. It's not for everybody, and so but I think it's an ideal that one might want to strive towards amongst a few other ideals. But if something like data mesh makes a lot of sense for your company, I would say maybe try and figure out what the hard work is to get there. It won't happen overnight. This is a very, there's a lot to it, right? And the thing is too, a lot of the stuff that Zhamak talks about in data mesh, it's some of these technologies, they may or may not exist yet. And so, that's
And so, it's, I think similar to when we started doing Agile, where people thought Agile was going to solve the problem, right? That you're going to be dubbed Agile, right? And you're instantly Agile, and you're now doing 2-week iterations, and everything's hunky dory, right? And the business is getting what they want, and all that. But but the business people don't have time to be on the Agile team, right? So, but you guys still, you need to produce stuff every 2 weeks.
Right, and then it becomes more just waterfall.
It's mini waterfall.
We see this often. How many companies have you seen? You've been around a lot longer than I have. Like, how many companies have you seen doing Agile in the way it was described in the manifesto?
Oh, yeah. Fewer than are just calling themselves Agile. I ran into one company one time that was actually, they were very proud of themselves. We were looking at there was actually a migration to Snowflake, and they they had everything broken up into what they considered 2-week sprints, 2 weeks deliverables. And they were very proud of themselves that, in the last 3 months, they had loaded 75% of the staging tables. Every 2 weeks, they were getting more data into stage, but they hadn't delivered anything to the business because they were going to load all the stage tables and then load the warehouse tables, then load the consumption tables, and then build the reports. And it's like, this is, why do you guys think you're agile? Oh, because we're doing 2-week deliveries. We're delivering stuff in 2 weeks. I said, but you're not delivering anything to the business in 2 weeks. Well, yeah, because we don't have all the data loaded yet. It's like, why do you have to have then we went through that conversation. Why do you have to have all the data loaded to deliver, right? And we got them reoriented. It's like, okay, let's go all the way across. It's like take a couple of those stage tables and push it all the way through and get the business involved to make sure that you're actually loading the right data. And I can see the same thing with when data mesh came up. It's, I think it's a great concept and the idea, but as soon as people say, oh, we're going to eliminate the bottleneck in IT because we're going to do data mesh. But like you said, it's like, if you can't just jump in and do data mesh. You got to have the right organization for it.
Right. Yeah. And I really wish the industry would take a look back at lean, right? I think that was the first, that's where DevOps came from. For example, if you look at the genesis of DevOps, that's agile, I would argue to a large degree too. It's the principles of lean, right? So focus on the end customer and deliver value for the end customer in as low fidelity as a way as possible, right? Reducing waste, eliminating waste, eliminating bottlenecks along the way. Those are just, these aren't new concepts. And these are very valuable concepts that have been proven to work. I'm
with you. Again. Yeah. My favorite agile principle is maximize the amount of work not done. It's one of the agile principles. And it's like, don't code ETL that you don't need to code. Don't load tables that you don't need to load. And I always have to say the caveat is that you don't need to load today, right? We're going to go for an MVP, a minimum viable product, and get data in front of the business user. Yeah, let's find something that they need, and they need more than they need something else. And don't waste your time today doing all this other stuff when it's lower value. Right? Let's get the high value stuff in front of them first, and build our processes
100%.
And get our technology straight along the way, so that we can become effective. And now we're back to how do you do that? And it's automation.
But that's but if you want to get the people process, you want to get the people on board for the people process technology trio, right? You show them wins,
exactly,
right? And you show them frequent wins and small wins, and that's how you get adoption and trust. Waiting 2 years from now to deliver something and that nobody asked for, that's
and that's the challenge. So whether it's data mesh, agile data, trying to do data ops and true data ops, trying to, it's all, our goals are all the same. We want to deliver something valuable to the business, make the data useful. And you were a data scientist, and I'm sure you spent a lot of time looking at data that was like totally useless to you, right? That you couldn't do anything with.
Oh, yeah, a lot.
Low quality, low fidelity. Yeah. Do we really want to be basing business decisions on this? We're going to write an algorithm. We can get an answer, but is that answer really arguably any good, right? We want to do better than that. So, need to close up here pretty soon. But one of the questions I always like to ask is like, if you weren't doing data and all this stuff you do with data, what would Joe do?
Like,
outside of data. Yeah. If you weren't a data geek doing all this fun stuff, what else would you do? Or what else do you do?
Probably out rock climbing. I would just be traveling around like I did when I was younger, just traveling climbing areas and just living like a dirtbag. So
be a vagabond rock climber.
That's what I did before I went to college. So or I moved to Salt Lake. I actually went to college pretty young, but then I just had to be a bum for a while. So it was fun. I miss it.
Well, hopefully you get back to it at some point. You got to get outside, as I think we all learned over the last couple of years, right? It's like we can't sit in these virtual studios all the time talking to each other. You got to get outside, get some fresh air.
Everyone's a rectangle.
It's a rectangle. Yes, this little rectangle is not a great window on life all the time, right? Just future wise, how do you think we're doing in the data space? Are we going to get so we can get more companies to be productive and make good use of their data? Is that something we can look forward to here in 2023?
I hope so. I mean, I wrote about this in my Substack a couple of weeks ago about kind of the two themes that I've seen in data. And one is is the data believable, right? And then if it is, can I trust it? That's the second point. And I think those are the two recurring themes I've always seen. And so I'd be curious to see how those are addressed. If you can address those, and I think a lot of things fall into place. And if you can't, then you get fancier tools, which are also fun. But we'll see. Yeah, but I'm very excited. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in data right now. I'm very excited about the stuff that's happening with AI and ML too. I think that the last couple of weeks of everyone posting screenshots of Chat GPT and the results coming from that is both interesting and potentially terrifying at the same time. But it's things like this that I think usher in inflection points in our industry that we need to watch too. I had a really good chat this morning on my show with Sarah Catanzaro. She's a general partner at Amplify, which invests in data tooling and like DBT and whatnot. But we had a good conversation. And one thing is she's looking forward to, and I think I am as well, is actually small databases. So things like MotherDuck and sort of the next generation of data applications and whatnot. So I think these are the things I'm really excited about as well. It's just getting data. I think the other thing I'm really excited about is I wrote about this in the book, is just real time. And I think more kind of user facing data applications. Internal BI, I think, is great, but that's, we've been doing that for a while, but now it's putting data in the hands of end users on mobile apps and so forth. That's going to require a whole new way of doing stuff.
Yeah.
So, it should be exciting. But at the end of the day, your data still needs to be believable, and it still needs to be valuable.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, thanks for being my guest today, Joe. It's been great having you on and having the chat. Everyone, be sure to seek him out and stalk him on LinkedIn and Substack and everywhere else. You can pepper him with questions on all the things that he's an expert on, and listen to his weekly podcast as well. See, this is your Monday now. Is going to listen to Joe's podcast in the morning and listen to my podcast in the afternoon. And, it'll be Data Monday, right? Every Monday is going to be a Data Monday. Thanks everyone else for joining us, and be sure to join us next week. My guest is going to be Mark Balkanende, the Vice President of Product Marketing at Matillion. And then, Mark and I will have a conversation about his experience as he's been out there helping folks become more data driven, and where data ops fits in his world. So thanks everybody, and have a great week.